Hi, and welcome to another talk time. I have Roger Saxelby about to join us for a very intriguing look at hypnotherapy and what has he learned over all the years that he's been in practice. He's been a trainer of hypnotherapy. He's trained with the best of them out there, one including Gil Boyne, which for those that are in the know understand. So I'm going to, inquire about his take on some of these amazing trainers that he has had the privilege to talk to over the years. I hope you enjoy today's talk time. Buckle up. Here we go. So, Roger, welcome back. It's lovely to have you week 2 on Talk Time. One of the things that fascinated me the most about you is, as I said last time, your curiosity, and that you have really put in the hours to go out there and train with some of the best out there. And you mentioned Gil Boyne, and I thought we could start with him and maybe your take on his style. So people out there who are just interested in learning a bit more about who's who and a bit more about the different hypnotic styles can kind of start to get a bit of an understanding of that. How did you find Gil Boyne?
Well, Gil Boyne was a fascinating character, and I feel very privileged actually to have met him personally and spent a lot of time with him because I first met him in America. I went over to train with them and to attend a conference. And through Gil Boyne, I learned quite a lot. I learned an instant inductions and started using them in with every client I had when I came back from America. And then for some reason or other, the novelty wore off, and I started doing sort of more relaxation inductions. But um, Gil Boyne taught me that using instant inductions could be very, very useful, saves a lot of time. You get more time to talk about the client and the client's problem. And so I do use them occasionally with clients, but very, very seldom. I obviously I taught them in my classes and taught every student, uh, and I know that many students, especially female students, uh, don't use them, even though I taught it. They don't like the style or they don't feel confident enough, and that's fine. There's other methods as well, but I do find them very useful. Gil Boyne, a fascinating character, as I said, and I think he was one of those people who polarized. You either loved him or didn't love him, and but I know that when he came here, we had him. Our Alpha Hypnosis Training School had him over here twice to run master classes, and wherever I took him, people seemed to um, somehow they admired him. They would run after him, and he just seemed to command respect, you know. And yeah, I guess that's about all I can say about Gil, really. But I know that when I was over there, he was a very busy man running his workshops and his conference, of course.
So when we're looking at his style, and we think about instant inductions, let's talk on that for a moment around, I guess, that authoritarian styled induction. Yeah. Do you want to share a little bit about how that all works so people who are just starting can get their head around what an instant induction is for a start, and
Yeah,
maybe the difference between authoritarian styled hypnosis versus more passive, where you're allowing a client to kind of do something rather than commanding them directly.
yeah. Gil Boyne using his instant inductions was very authoritarian. and he was the master, and he was very effective. And I think that he used his personality to great advantage. He seemed to have a lot of success with his clients, and as I say, you felt as if you had to do what he said. And whereas with a lot of the relaxation type inductions, I would say, what would be the words, wishy-washy in comparison. He was very direct, and even with his therapy, and also in the special conferences that he ran for dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of hypnotherapists were watching him. He would demonstrate with a client and all the technique that he used, and then afterwards he would describe why he did certain things. And I think he was quite a spiritual man too. He used to use quotations from the Bible quite often that I think at the time I heard them seemed to be appropriate for the clients he was working with. And he also had a habit of touching people. Even men would hold at a certain point in the therapy, he would take their hand and hold it. And I think it was giving a sort of a reassurance and like, I'm with you, we're in this together sort of thing. I don't know if that's what he was thinking, but that was the impression that I had quite often, you know. And, when I was studying, we were forbidden actually to touch a client. It was too risky. But now I quite often, if it's appropriate, I may put a hand on a client's shoulder, or if I'm using certain inductions, I may say to them, in a few moments, I may tap on your forehead, or I may lift your arm. So I ask them for permission, because sometimes if you touch a person and they're not expecting, it can be quite a shock to them.
Especially if they've got their eyes closed too. Quite often we need to let them know we kind of in a moment I'm going to, and like heads up, but also compounding expectations. So in a moment when I do that, you're going to feel this, and then this is going to happen. So that's all part of that compliance as well, where we want the buy-in from the client. Nod your head when you're ready, or whatever that might be in the way of permissions. Because if we don't get that, it doesn't always go well, especially in these modern times.
I find that quite often I'm using techniques that are just automatic now. I'm not even aware that I'm doing it, because as you know, I've been doing this for quite a long time. But other people that I've trained with over the years, when I was in America training with Gil Boyne, I also did a course with Ormond McGill. Now, probably Ormond.
How did you find him as a trainer?
Ormond McGill is the exact opposite of Gil Boyne. He's very, very gentle man. And yet he was a stage hypnotist and a magician. And he traveled the world. He traveled all through India and places like that. And I've got a couple of books by Ormond McGill teaching his stage hypnosis techniques. But as I say, whereas Gil Boyne was very direct, very authoritarian, it was quite interesting to see some of the old videos of Ormond McGill on the stage doing stage hypnosis. Complete opposite to most of the hypnotists that you see today. Quite gentle, but seemed to get the results. And he was very highly regarded in America. When I was there, most of the hypnotists or hypnotherapists that were watching him, demonstrations and so on, they just thought the world of him,
I remember it changed my practice. I had a book and I was reading about an eye fixation induction, and I've actually got my take of Ormond McGill. So I've got a book, original book from him. It was in a green cover, And it changed the way I did my inductions with people, and having that eye lock, sort of focusing on one point above your normal eye level. And in a moment, I'm going to count from 10 down to 1. And, on the count of 1, all of that kind of stuff. And it stuck.
Yeah,
It made sense to me. And that was one that for me, I was very grateful to have come across, because it wasn't one I had been trained to do. So yeah, that struck a nice
right.
happy chord for me when you mentioned his name.
Yeah. I use quite a few. I use some of those techniques that I learned from those people, like uh, counting from 1 to 3, and then doing something. It's like it becomes, in a sense, like a bit
Mm.
of an anchor. And I suppose it could be a bit more authoritarian, but I find it very helpful. In a moment, I'll count from 1 to 3 on the count of 3, not before, things like that. I find quite
Mm, mm.
effective.
Excellent. And so he was quite a different character, and different style, which I think people need to understand. And I do try and impress this on people tuning in, that we are all different. And just because we're not as authoritarian as someone else doesn't make it less effective. I think you've got to find your own way of sitting in this field, your own flavor. And again, when you understand the foundations of what an induction is, you can play around and make it your own.
Yeah, the same with using scripts to start off. It gets you started. It gives you lots of ideas, and then you can sort of generalize uh, from what you've read and what you've learned in scripts, and bring in your own information. And of course, the more you learn, the more you add. We're all learning all the time. Some of the other people I've trained with personally, and got to know quite well, was C. Roy
Mm,
Hunter. Very well known from his books, as you probably know. But I met him in America, had a meal with him, got to know him quite well, and then we invited him. Alpha Hypnosis Training invited him over here, and I think we had him also for the association one time. But he was, again, very different, very spiritual man. He I know that when he arrived in Auckland, I went to pick him and his wife up at the airport, and I've never seen so much luggage in my life. They had enormous cases because they'd been to Sydney for, I think, for about a week or something, and then came to New Zealand. But yeah, that was one of the things that made me laugh. But C. Roy Hunter, very knowledgeable man. I trained with him in America.
when we're looking at, yeah, when we're looking at the different styles of people, you mentioned a thread, I guess, that sometimes, there is a level of spirituality. And I think that's sometimes too where some people can give hypnotherapy a bit of a bad rap. They get this idea that we're going to take over their mind, or it's evil, or something like that. And what I've found is many times very amazing, good-hearted people are attracted to this career because they genuinely want to help people, and they want to make that positive change. And I think there is a lot of fear wrapped around hypnotherapy over the years. And what do you think about that, Roger?
Yeah, I definitely have come across the fear. When I first started, I found it very difficult to get people to practice with. Whereas in years later, when I started my school, and especially in the later years of the school, people had they had friends waiting for them to graduate so they could help them. So there was a big change. But back in the days when I started in 1980, when I started my practice in Panmure in Auckland, uh, if people asked you, what do you do for a living? And I'd say I was a hypnotherapist. And quite honestly, it's a bit of a joke, but it was true. they'd put their hand up and say, "Don't look at me,
Yeah.
don't look at me." You know, there was a lot of apprehension about it, and frequently I had, especially women, would ask, can they bring their husband along or bring a partner along, just to make sure that they expecting to be put unconscious, and they wouldn't know what was going on. You see, so there was a lot of teaching to
Mm.
do, really. Uh, One of the main things is making them aware that they wouldn't be unconscious or actually asleep. You know, I remember, I remember one young woman. She said to me, "Can I bring my partner along?" And she had just told me that he doesn't believe in that rubbish. And then in the next moment, she wants them to come along, or he wanted to come along. I beg your pardon. That's right. He wanted to come along and make sure that everything was okay, but he didn't believe in hypnosis. So I found that quite interesting. You
Yeah.
know, I also did some training in Australia many years ago with the Australian Academy of Hypnotic Science, and that was run by Jim and John Goulding. And Jim Goulding, I remember the very first day in the class, we had about roughly 35 people. And at one point, Jim asked, were there any smokers in the class? And quite a few hands went up. And he said, now don't feel bad about smoking. I smoke myself. I've always been a smoker. And he says, my dad was a smoker. Smoking killed my father. And everyone, like, oh, what's this about? He said, yeah, my dad was a farmer, and he was riding on his tractor one day, and he was smoking his cigarette, and he had a fit of coughing, and he fell off the tractor and it ran over him. It was a big joke, of course, but he was justifying his reason for smoking. I found that really fascinating because he was helping a lot of people to stop smoking, but was still
Mm.
smoking himself. I found that quite fascinating, you know. Uh, and also, when I started practicing, one of the people I started practicing was quite a heavy smoker, and he would tell people, "I'm a smoker and I've got no intention of stopping, but if you want to stop, I can make
Mm.
it easy for you." I find that quite fascinating, because personally I was a smoker until I decided to train, and I thought, if I'm going to help other people to stop smoking, it does, it just doesn't make sense to be a smoker. And so I had a book, uh, Stop Smoking with Self Hypnosis. And in the old days of cassette tapes, I recorded the tape direct from the book, put the earphones on, listened to it, and I've never smoked since. And at the time, I remember thinking, oh, that's not working, it's not making any difference. But of course, it made an impression on my subconscious. And that was one of the reasons I was quite enthusiastic about helping smokers, you know.
Yeah.
But working with Jim and John Goulding, um, that was quite fascinating. Jim was quite an interesting man. He had been a butcher and got into hypnotherapy. And I remember a story he told us about, he was quite a small man. And in the days, we used to sit behind the desk, and the client would be on the other side of the desk. It's a bit different
Yeah.
now, you know. But he would walk. He would walk. He made sure that he had a chair for the client that was quite low, closer to the floor. He would walk around and sit on the desk so that he could look down on people. And it gave him a feeling of authority, obviously. I find that quite interesting to learn these things from some of the older
Yeah.
chaps and the different styles. So when I started, I was sitting behind a desk. I never ever did that. I didn't walk around and sit and look down on
Mm.
them, but I did eventually move from behind the desk to beside the desk, sitting opposite the client. And one of the things I used to do was to put the chair back a bit and invite them to bring the chair where they felt comfortable. I found that was quite
Mm,
effective. One of the things I learned when I was training and counselling,
that's
actually.
fascinating. I remember the good old days when I first started. I had absolutely no money, and I had deck chairs, like these black deck chairs that I had in my office because that's all I could afford. And I remember someone coming in going, I think you need to invest in a more comfortable chair. So the one that I'm sitting in, literally, it's over 30 years old. And that was my chair, is a recliner.
Uh,
It was quite funny, but
it looks really good. Yeah. Well, when I first started, I didn't have any chairs at all, and so I had to furnish the therapy room. And I saw an ad in the local paper that they used to have in those days instead of Trade Me and so on. And I went round to have a look at this uh, lazy boy chair, and it was ripped to pieces. There was no, honestly, but it also had a swathe of material with it. I think I paid something like $20, and I took the chair home and all the material, and my wife actually recovered it, and that did me for quite a few years. It looked really good, and one day I had a young boy as a client, and I won't go into all the details, but he ended up wetting the seat right through all the sponge on, and right through to the
oh
carpet.
no.
And luckily, where my office was, there was an upholsterer across the laneway, and I had it reupholstered, and that lasted me quite a number of years. And eventually, because of the office I have now, a lazy boy is not suitable because you have to have, well, the lazy boy lays back, but the wall prevents that. So I sold it to another therapist.
Nice.
Bought it off me years ago and was thrilled to bits. So it went from one therapist to another. I was quite
Very
pleased
good.
about that.
Yeah. So when we're looking at the idea of setting up a room and not having a barrier between you and the client, that was what I was taught. So that's kind of how I've always been. Even if I might have a desk, I don't necessarily have it in between me and the client. So that's interesting that you had a different beginning there. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, just talking about beginnings, in those days, I went to my office with a
Mm.
suit and a tie, and in the summer I wore the old fashioned idea, long
Oh yes.
socks, short sleeve shirt, but with a
Yeah.
tie. And then over the years, it's gradually become so much more
Mm.
casual. I mean, even when I go to the doctor, they're very casual these days. And of course, I often see clients with I don't wear a tie. I can't even remember when I last
Mm.
wore a tie. So, yes, and with the desk idea, as I said, I used to sit behind the desk, and then years later, I moved the desk back and sat on the same side of the desk as I do now with my
Mm.
client, and it seems to be much more comfortable for them
Mm.
and for me, for that matter.
If we think about the trainings that you've journeyed, what do you think might have been a standout for you that really did change maybe your perspective or how you worked with clients? What comes to mind?
With the various trainings over the years, I think I'm a bit more uh, much less authoritative. Not that I was ever in the style of
Mm.
Gil Boyne, but as I said, I used to use instant induction, the real novelty, and it seemed to work. And everyone who came in, when they were ready to be hypnotized, I'd get them to stand in front of the chair, hands up here, look at me, and then the instant induction. But that novelty, after a while, wore off, and I just started doing what I'd call relaxation type inductions. And of course, I did more training in NLP, and that changed my opinions a bit about dealing with people. Uh, when I learned some of the things that they teach you in NLP, like the meta model and that sort of thing, my style of work gradually changed. And then, of course, learning uh, and also teaching um, Ericksonian hypnosis made a difference as well. So much less direct, more indirect suggestions these days than I used to do when I first started, you know. And of course, a lot of the books way back then uh, in 1980 were quite uh, authoritarian suggestions, you know. You will do this and you can do. And I remember reading some of the books where Harry Aarons, for instance, was probably one of the first well-known teachers in America. Uh, and he was one of those people who you cannot do this until I give you permission, sort of thing. You know, you very authoritarian. And then, of course, along came Dave Ellman, teaching doctors, and he was less directive, less authoritarian, I should say. So yeah, you pick up bits and pieces, and as you said before, we're all individuals trying to be Gil Boyne doesn't work. People realize that you're trying to. I think they realize subconsciously, at least, that you're not being authentic, and that trying to be Milton Erickson doesn't work. So be yourself, find your own method, and learn from everybody, but internalize it and make it yours. Put your own stamp on it. That's what I think.
The other day, after we stopped recording, all the good stuff came in, and we mentioned something which I thought would be good to bring out. And that is that idea that a person needs to almost be convinced that they were hypnotized, that convincer. Often if people come in for a hypnotherapy session, they might go, oh no, that was just guided relaxation. I wasn't hypnotized, or that sort of thing. So having someone have a feeling that it's just a little different. Do you want to talk about that for a mo? Because I think it's important personally that someone does have a feeling like it's not their normal, that something special is happening.
When I first started practicing in Panmure in Auckland in 1980, I put an ad in the local paper and I called my business the Hypnosis Centre. And I got numerous phone calls from people saying, do you actually do hypnosis? And I said, yes, of course. And they say, because I've been to a hypnotherapist and I didn't get hypnotized. They just talked to me. I did get relaxed, but I wasn't hypnotized. And so that told me that they needed to know something different had happened for them. And so with most of my clients on the first session, I use a convincer. I don't do it with every client because some clients have been hypnotized before. And if they have been, I asked them what sort of method, couldn't I remember what sort of method was used? Did it work for them? Did it help them? Did they enjoy it? And if it did, I'd try to use the same type of induction. And if it wasn't successful, I'll use something totally different. But I started using convincers, and uh, I, I believe that it made quite a difference. People went away, they knew at least something different had happened because they couldn't open their eyes or they couldn't lift their arm. Um, and I had some interesting experiences because I had a guy came in one time. He was an axeman, a wood chopper, and he used to go in these competitions. Big, muscular chap, And he turned out to be an excellent subject, very good responder. And because he responded so well, I actually suggested to him that his arm was so heavy that he couldn't lift it. And I gave him the challenge. You can make an attempt, you can try and lift it, and find the harder you try, the heavier it gets. And so he's sitting there like this, you know, and eventually I told him, now you can lift your arm. And when we spoke about it after, he said, yeah, I knew you didn't really want me to. I could have tried a bit harder. I said, well, how hard? Lift your arm now. How hard do you have to try? And the same with the eye locks. But I do think that the way you present it can make a difference. I present it to my clients as this is the power of your mind. You're doing this with your own mind. And but the thinking behind it is if he said, I can't open my eyes, and I can't open my eyes, and now he says I'll stop smoking or I'll lose weight, obviously it seems to them as if, oh, this is going to work because this is not just relaxation.
Yeah, I think that's vital, especially if people feel that hypnosis is going to help them. They often do need to have that convincer moment that allows them to believe in the hypnosis, and that kind of compounds the effectiveness, I feel, of taking on board that suggestion and then actioning it. Like, yeah, no, it's out of my control now. It's all happening easily. It's like, yay, let's get past that block, that whatever that was, and get that person into achieving whatever it is that they really, are ready to achieve. People just need often that clear intention and a moment to switch on that switch of change. And this is where metaphor and using that in inductions and things can be very, very powerful. So you can use language within an induction moment. Like in a moment, it's like a switch goes on. Now, people will make it like that. So when we're beginning to sort of work with clients, I think a lot of these very amazing trainers over the years have evolved a deeper, broader understanding of the power of suggestion 101. Like there are many ways you can invite a suggestion to happen, and your imagination is really free to experiment. So, Roger, when we're thinking about the kind of inductions that you use these days, have you embellished them into your own flavour, or have you stayed with what you've been taught over the years? How different or how similar are they, do you think?
Yeah, I've got my own style, I think, and it's very it's more indirect than authoritarian. When I do an eye catalepsy, I let the client know that it's their mind that they're using to create that experience. And what I do actually is I learned off an English hypnotist, and I've changed it a little bit, but I get them to go into the control room of their own mind and find all the dials and switches and so on that control the eyelids. So there's quite a, it's not just close your eyes, relax them to the point where they won't open, try and open them. That's a little bit, in my opinion, just a little bit too direct for a lot of people. And if it backfires, if it doesn't work, then there's disappointment in the whole thing. And so the way I do it, and have been doing it for a long time, using that, I want you to enter the control room of your own mind and then use all these switches and dials and so on, and using the power of your imagination and so on. I've never had a failure since I've been doing that way. And I find it's very, very effective.
I've got another question, and it's something that I've evolved into my inductions. And that is adding value to the intention of what the session was about and weaving it within the induction itself. So as you prepare to go deeper and deeper, this is then helping you to address those core things that allow you the freedom to take action in a positive and amazing way. And in a moment, we're going to, like I already start by implanting the whole intention before we even go into the deepener or more of the induction process. What do you do? Do you ever play around with that idea?
Yeah, when I use my induction, I do the eye catalepsy after the induction, quite a way after. I usually do a countdown from 10 down, and I give them suggestions that they'll go deeper and deeper, and then after I've done that, and by the way, a lot of people come in and they expect to sit in the big chair, the relaxing chair, straight away. I always do my first session in an ordinary office chair, so that I can see them. Their head drops, uh, and I can see the change in their breathing when they're sitting normally. And then, as I said, a lot of people expect to sit in the big chair. I say, no, you can't do that. You're in this chair, and if you behave yourself and do it, have a bit of lightness, you may be able to graduate to the big chair.
Yeah.
You know, I find that seems to work with most people quite well. Um, so I do a countdown after the relaxation, and then I give them suggestions that as they continue to relax, and as you listen to my voice, um, you know that your inner mind, your subconscious mind, is more open to receive and to act upon these suggestions that are all for your benefit. That's the sort of thing I do, and and then I start working on whatever it is that they. And I usually use suggestions along the lines of you're you know that you're here for a reason. So I'm really feeding back what they've told me, why they came to me. And it's your intention and things like that. I'm really, I suppose, backing up what they've told
Mm.
me. So it's their idea I'm putting into their head on their behalf.
Yeah, that's powerful. I think, when we are also able to demonstrate as practitioners extreme listening skills and be able to mirror back the client's words, within that hypnotic journey, it can be profoundly useful for the client, one, to feel heard, validated, and also to compound what it is that they're wanting to build in a way that makes sense to them because you're using their own language. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. If you if you hear clients using like certain metaphors, like oh, I feel as if I'm up against a brick wall and things like that. If you can incorporate that in some way, help them to either get over or through or around that wall, just for example, that can be quite effective, you know,
Excellent.
because you're really talking to them the way they think.
Absolutely. Now, we're coming to the end of today's talk time, and I just want to thank you for being honest as well about your experience and sharing little wee bits with the audience out there. Because I think, when people go into this field, or even if they just go to a hypnotherapist, there's lots of questions. And I think as educators, it can be really nice to be able to pass on what we've observed, how we've worked with that, our take on it. I think hopefully that can then be passed on for the generations to come, as a tool of awareness. So thank you again, Roger, for joining us today, and we'll have you back another week. I look forward to catching up and delving into your knowledge bank again. And, really do appreciate you coming on board.
Thanks very much, Meredith. It's been a pleasure, really, and if it's of help to some of the newer practitioners, I'll be more than happy.
Nice. So thank you to all of you for tuning in today. If you've liked this, remember to like and subscribe. If you're interested in learning more about becoming a clinical hypnotherapist, check out the website nzach.ac.nz. We'll be back here in another week, and for now, bye.